Their hands were trembling, their eyes filled with hunger. They didn't look like the enemy, just children who hadn't eaten in days. I was about to give them food when General Patton leaned toward me and whispered, "An order I've never forgotten." I was 15 years old, a corporal, James Walker, farm boy from rural Tennessee, 8 months into a war that had already taken everything I thought I understood about the world and ground it into the mud of European soil. I'd seen things by then that no man should see. I'd done things that I carried quietly for the rest of my life, the way you carry a stone in your shoe, always there, always pressing. But nothing prepared me for what happened that morning at the checkpoint. Nothing prepared me for Anna. Let me paint you the picture of Kronberg in May of 1945, because without understanding what that place looked like, what it smelled like, what it felt like, you can't understand the weight of what happened there. But up close, the illusion shattered. The windows were empty, most of them, not broken necessarily, just dark, dead-eyed, like a face with the lights gone out behind it. The streets had a silence that wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of exhaustion, of people who had used up everything they had just surviving and had nothing left, not even the energy to make noise. Supply lines into the town had been severed weeks earlier. German soldiers retreating through had taken whatever food stocks remained. The people of Kronberg, roughly 3,000 of them, had been surviving on almost nothing. You could see it in every face you passed. The tightness around the eyes, the way people walked, carefully, conserving energy, no movement wasted. Children who should have been running and shouting in the streets moved slowly, quietly, with the deliberate movements of old people. Our unit had been assigned to set up a checkpoint on the main road in and out of town. Standard procedure in the aftermath of advance. Control movement, maintain security, assess the civilian situation. We'd been there 3 days when the morning everything changed arrived. I was on the early shift. 6 in the morning, the air still sharp with cold, my breath making small clouds in front of my face. Sergeant Dale Morrison was posted with me, a career soldier, 34 years old, hard as the boots he wore. Good man in a fight, complicated man in the quiet moments. That's when I saw her coming down the road. She was maybe 7 years old, small even for that, the smallness of a child who hasn't been eating enough. Her dress was too large for her, clearly handed down from someone bigger, hanging off her thin shoulders. Her shoes had holes in them, the leather split at the toe, and she walked with the particular careful step of someone trying to keep footwear on their feet by sheer will. Blonde pigtails. I don't know why that detail hit me so hard, but it did. Something about those carefully braided pigtails in the middle of all that devastation. Someone had done that for her that morning. Some adult, her mother or grandmother, or an older neighbor, had taken the time to braid this little girl's hair before sending her out. That small act of normalcy in the ruins of a collapsed world. She walked right up to the checkpoint. Didn't hesitate, didn't seem afraid, just walked up and stopped in front of me and looked up at my face. And then she held out her hands. She didn't say a word. She didn't speak English, and even if she had, I don't think words were necessary. The gesture was older than language. The oldest gesture in the human story, probably. Cupped hands, held up, open, asking. The international language of hunger. I stood there frozen. Behind me I heard Morrison's boots on the road. He walked up to my shoulder, looked at the girl, looked at me. Walker. Sarge, she's just... I see what she is. She's hungry. A lot of people are hungry. His voice wasn't cruel. That's the thing I want you to understand. Morrison wasn't a cruel man. He was a man who'd learned to keep a wall between himself and suffering, because otherwise the suffering swallowed you whole. That's what happens when you start a war and lose it. We're not a relief organization. We're soldiers. I reached into my pocket. My hand closed around the candy bar. Walker, don't. It's my ration, Sarge. It's not about the chocolate, and you know it. He stepped in front of me, lowered his voice. You give that girl food, every child in this town is standing here in an hour. Then what? You got enough in your pockets for 3,000 people? You start something you can't finish, you understand? You give her hope you can't back up. I looked at the girl. She hadn't moved. She was still standing there, hands out, patient in a way that children shouldn't have to be patient. Patient with the patience of someone who has learned that the world doesn't hurry itself on your account. And then I looked up. They were coming out of the side streets, slowly, cautiously, the way stray animals approach something uncertain. Children, a dozen of them, then 20, then more, ages ranging from maybe 4 years old to teenagers, all thin, all quiet, all watching. Word had spread the way word spreads in desperate places, instantly, silently, through whatever invisible network connects people who are all waiting for the same thing. The Americans were at the checkpoint. Americans had food. Maybe today was different. An older boy stepped forward from the group, 12 years old, maybe 13, with the hollow-cheeked look of someone who'd been subsisting on almost nothing for weeks. He spoke careful, halting English. "Please, sir, we are hungry." "You have food," Morrison answered before I could. "No food, go back to town. Please, the children very hungry." "Not our problem, move along." The boy didn't move. And then from somewhere in the middle of that group of children, a small girl, 6 years old at most, started to cry. Not dramatic crying, not the loud wailing of a child throwing a tantrum. Quiet tears, the barely audible crying of a child who is too weak, too tired, too hungry to cry any louder than that. Something broke open in my chest. I don't know how else to describe it. Some wall I'd been maintaining, some necessary emotional distance that keeps a soldier functional, just gave way. I thought about my little sister back in Tennessee. I thought about my mother's kitchen table, about the smell of food, about what it meant to grow up with enough. I thought about what it must be like to be 7 years old and so hungry that you walk up to armed foreign soldiers and hold out your hands because you have simply run out of other options. I pulled out the candy bar. "Walker." Morrison's voice was flat, final. "I hear you, Sarge." I unwrapped it, broke it into pieces, walked toward the children. Morrison didn't physically stop me. He stood back, jaw tight, and watched. I moved through that group of children, pressing pieces of chocolate into small hands. There wasn't enough, not nearly. 30 children, 1 candy bar. Most of them got a fragment smaller than a fingernail. The ones who got slightly more broke their pieces in half, without being asked, and passed some to the younger children standing next to them. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Children who were themselves starving, voluntarily sharing the scrap of food they'd just received with someone smaller. I have never forgotten that. I will never forget that. In all my years, I have never seen a purer expression of human goodness than those hungry children dividing almost nothing among themselves. Within 30 seconds, the chocolate was gone. I turned my pockets inside out, showed them empty palms. The children looked for another moment, then understood, and slowly, without anger, without complaint, turned and walked back toward town. The girl with the pigtails was the last to go. She looked back at me once. Then she was gone. Lieutenant Cross wrote it up, as he had to. The report moved up the chain the way these things do, gaining weight and official language as it rose. Morrison wrote his version. Cross wrote his. The question posed to higher command was simple. How do we handle this? Discipline the corporal or let it go? I spent 2 days confined to camp, waiting. I want to tell you I was calm about it. I wasn't. I lay on my cot at night and stared at the canvas ceiling and turned the whole thing over and over in my head. Had I done right? Morrison wasn't wrong, technically. The logic of his argument was sound. You can't feed everyone. You can't sustain hope you aren't equipped to back up. Rules exist for reasons. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those cupped hands. On the third morning, word came down. General Patton was coming to Kronberg personally. The name alone was enough to put every man in our unit at rigid attention internally, even hours before his arrival. George S. Patton, Third Army. The man who had driven his forces across France at a pace that seemed almost superhuman. The man with the ivory-handled pistols and the reputation that preceded him like a weather front. Nobody who served under him was casual about his arrival. His jeep rolled into Kronberg the next morning. I watched from a distance as he climbed out, stood in the road, and looked at the town with those sharp eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they touched. He spoke with Lieutenant Cross briefly, then he said something that surprised everyone. "Show me the checkpoint." They brought me forward. I stood at attention in front of General George S. Patton and tried to keep my breathing steady and my face neutral, and mostly failed at both. He was taller than I expected, not physically, but in presence, the kind of man who fills more space than his body actually occupies. He looked at me for a long moment without speaking, the way a man looks at something he's trying to accurately assess. "You gave away your ration to German civilians," he said. "Not a question, a statement of fact, flat and precise." "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because they were hungry, sir, and they were children." He looked at me for another moment. Then he turned and looked at the checkpoint area, at the road leading into Kronberg, at the space where the children had stood. He clasped his hands behind his back. "You know what the regulations say?" "Yes, sir." "You know what Sergeant Morrison told you?" "Yes, sir." "And you did it anyway?" "Yes, sir." Silence. Long enough that I began to wonder if I should add something, some explanation, some defense. I decided against it. I had done what I had done. The reasons were what they were. Then Patton turned back to me and said something I have carried in my heart every single day for 60 years. He said quietly, almost privately, like a man thinking out loud, "We didn't cross an ocean and bury our brothers in foreign soil so that we could become the thing we came to destroy." He let that sit in the air for a moment. Then his voice shifted back to command register, crisp and decisive. "Get me the supply officer." What happened next moved with the efficiency that characterized everything Patton did. Within 20 minutes of his arrival, he had spoken with the supply officer, assessed available stocks, consulted briefly with Lieutenant Cross, and issued a clear, direct order. A distribution point was to be established in the Kronberg town square, operational twice daily, 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Soup, bread, and where available, milk for the youngest children. Organized, systematic, equitable. Every child in the sector was to receive food every day until relief organizations arrived to take over the function. "Not charity," Patton said, and I remember this specifically, the way he said it with that slight edge in his voice, the distinction he was drawing. "Not sentiment, policy. We are the authority in this sector. The welfare of non-combatants, particularly children, is our responsibility. That's what it means to win a war. Not just defeating the enemy, deciding what you stand for in the silence after." He turned to Morrison then, and I want to be fair to Morrison here because Patton was. "Sergeant, your instinct for order and discipline is correct. Soldiers handing out personal rations individually creates chaos and sets expectations we can't sustain. You were right about that." Morrison straightened slightly. "And Corporal," Patton turned back to me, "your instinct for human decency was correct. Letting children starve in front of armed men sitting on adequate supplies is not discipline. It's a failure of what we're supposed to represent." He looked at both of us. "Both of you were right. Both of you were incomplete. That's why we have chains of command, so that 2 incomplete right answers can be combined into 1 complete one." Then he said the thing that I think surprised every man standing there more than anything else that morning. "Corporal Walker, you're not being disciplined. You're being assigned. You're now in charge of civilian relief operations for this sector. Set up the distribution point. Run it properly. Make sure those children get fed every morning and every evening until you're relieved of the duty. No excuses, no exceptions. He turned and walked back to his jeep. Before he climbed in, he stopped, his back still to us, and said one final thing. The measure of a soldier is not only what he does in the fight, it's what he does when the fight is over and nobody is watching. Make me proud. He drove away. I stood in the road for a long moment, listening to the sound of his jeep fading into the distance. Then I went to find the supply officer and get to work. Let me tell you about those 3 weeks. I want to tell you about them carefully because I think they were the most important weeks of my life. More important than any battle I was part of. More important than the day the war ended, which found me standing in the Kronberg town square, ladling soup. We had the first distribution point set up by that same afternoon. A row of folding tables in the cobblestone square, a field kitchen brought up from supply, volunteers from our unit rotating through shifts. I drew up a schedule and posted it the way I'd been taught to manage logistics, and I treated it with the seriousness I would have given any military operation, because that's what Patton's order had made it. The children came that evening. Tentatively at first, a small group, 20 or 30, word spread overnight. By the next morning, there were well over 100. Within a week, we had the thing running like clockwork. 6 a.m., table set, line forms, soup, bread. 6 p.m., same. The children learned the routine fast. They lined up with a discipline that shamed some of the adults I'd served with, patient, orderly, taking what they were given and moving on without complaint. And they changed. Week by week, I watched them change. The hollowness in their faces began to fill. Energy returned to their eyes. By the second week, there was noise in the town square during distribution, the sound of children talking to each other, the occasional laugh. By the third week, a couple of the younger ones were running. Actually running. The way children are supposed to run. I cannot tell you what it felt like to watch that. I don't have adequate words for it. I'll just tell you that I stood at those tables every morning and every evening, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 months of war. That what I was doing was unambiguously, uncomplicatedly good. The girl with the pigtails came every day. I learned her name in the second week. Anna, one of the other children, translated for me. Her father had died on the Eastern Front in 1943. Her mother had been killed in an air raid the following year. She lived with her grandmother, an old woman who could barely walk, in a small house 2 streets from the square. She was always near the front of the line. Not pushing, not cutting, just there early, waiting. She would collect her portion and then, I noticed, take a portion of her bread and put it carefully in her dress pocket. For her grandmother, I understood without being told. In the second week, she started to smile when she reached me at the head of the line. Not the cautious, uncertain expression she'd worn that first morning at the checkpoint. A real smile. The smile of a child who has begun, cautiously, to believe that tomorrow will also be okay. In the third week, on a Tuesday morning, she arrived at the distribution point and didn't get in line. She walked directly to me, holding something in her hand, a piece of paper folded into quarters. She held it out, and when I reached for it, she immediately turned and ran back to the line, too shy to watch me open it. I unfolded the paper. It was a drawing, done in pencil, careful pencil, the kind of careful that meant she had taken her time and done her very best work. A soldier standing behind a table, a child on the other side of the table, hands reaching forward. The soldier was identifiable as American by the uniform, and across his sleeve were the careful marks of corporal's stripes. The child in the drawing had pigtails. She couldn't write my name. She didn't know English letters. But she had drawn my face from memory, every feature she could recall, with the precise attention that children give to the people who matter to them. I stood in the middle of the Kronberg town square on a Tuesday morning in May 1945, and I am not ashamed to tell you that I wept. The war ended shortly after. I won't detail the journey home, the processing, the ship crossing, the train ride through landscapes that looked almost offensively normal and peaceful after everything I had seen. I'll skip to the moment that matters. I came home to Tennessee with a duffel bag of personal effects and a piece of paper folded into quarters, now soft at the creases from how many times it had been unfolded and refolded, carried close in my breast pocket through the final weeks of service and across the Atlantic and across half an American continent. I had it framed the first week I was home. Hung it on the wall of what would eventually become my family's living room, where it hung for the next 50 years. My children grew up with that drawing on the wall. They asked about it when they were young, and I told them as much as children can receive. My grandchildren asked about it too. My grandson, Michael, was 12 years old the last time he really pressed me on it. He stood in front of the frame for a long time, studying the pencil lines, the careful stripes on the soldier's sleeve, the pigtails on the child. Then he turned to me. "Grandpa, why is a kid's drawing the most important thing on your wall?" I sat with the question for a moment. "Because," I finally said, "of what it cost to earn it." He thought about that. "What did it cost?" "Almost a court-martial," I said, and he laughed, not knowing I was only partially joking. "But more than that, it cost the decision to be the kind of man I wanted to be at the moment when that decision was hardest to make. When I could have kept my candy bar and followed the rules and nobody would have blamed me. But you didn't. No, I didn't. And I didn't have good reasons at the time, not organized, logical reasons. I just looked at a little girl's empty hands and I thought, what is all of this for if not for this moment? What is any of it for?" Michael looked back at the drawing. "Did you ever find out what happened to her? Anna?" "No, I never did." He was quiet. "I hope she was okay," he said. "So do I told him. "So do I." I have thought about General Patton's words for more than 6 decades now. The specific whispered order, the quiet private thing he said before the public command that reorganized our sector's approach to civilian relief. We didn't cross an ocean and bury our brothers in foreign soil so that we could become the thing we came to destroy. I have turned those words over 10,000 times, the way you turn a stone in your hand, until you know every surface of it. What he understood, what that order contained, was something deeper than tactics or regulations or military procedure. It was a statement about identity, about what victory actually means. You can win every battle and lose the war for your own soul. You can defeat an enemy and become them in the process. History is full of cautionary examples. The greatness of that man, whatever else you think of Patton, whatever his considerable flaws, was that he understood this. He understood that how you win matters as much as whether you win, that the behavior of an army in the silence after the shooting stops defines what the fighting was actually for. Morrison was right. Hayes, the corporal in the story I heard later from another unit, same kind of situation playing out across liberated Germany in those weeks, was right too. Rules without humanity are machinery. Humanity without rules is chaos. The answer is always the integration, always the harder thing, the system that makes the human impulse sustainable. You can't save the world with one candy bar, but you can, with the right orders and the right organization and the willingness to be the kind of soldier, the kind of human being that the moment demands. Feed every child in a starving town every morning and every evening until someone better equipped to do the job arrives. That is what we did in Kronberg. That is what Patton ordered. That is what Anna's drawing, framed on my wall, means. I am an old man writing this now, and I want to leave you with the clearest thing I know. War is a brutal and dehumanizing thing. It asks you to do brutal and dehumanizing things, and it creates conditions where it becomes easy to stop seeing the humanity in the people on the other side. That is perhaps its most enduring damage, not the buildings, not even the bodies, but the slow erosion of the capacity to see a hungry child as simply a hungry child rather than an extension of an enemy. The little girl named Anna did not start the Second World War. She did not vote for Hitler. She did not design the camps, conscript the soldiers, or draw the lines on any maps. She was 7 years old, and her father was dead, and her mother was dead, and she was hungry. And one morning she walked up to a soldier named James Walker and held out her hands. And James Walker, thanks in no small part to a general who understood what armies are really for, was able to answer those hands with something real. Not just one chocolate bar, a table, soup, bread, regularity. The message, delivered twice a day for 3 weeks, that someone in a position of power had decided that her life had value. Is that what we were fighting for? I believe so. I believe that is exactly, precisely, completely what we were fighting for. The drawing is still on the wall. James Walker served as a corporal in the U.S. Army from 1943 to 1946. He returned home to Tennessee after the war, raised a family, and worked the land his father had worked before him. He spoke rarely about his service, but the drawing hung in his home until the end of his life. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy deep, emotional stories from history, moments where war, humanity, and impossible choices collide, then don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows these untold stories to be brought back to life. Tell us in the comments, if you were standing there that day, watching German children begging for food while General Patton made his decision, what would you have done? And what part of this moment do you think history remembers the most? The hunger or the order that followed? If you could step into one moment from this story, which scene would you choose to witness in person? See you in the next chapter of history.